Now, this is a quick, short video to talk a little bit about the Stanford prison experiment. This is perhaps the most famous study in the history of the field of social psychology. And it's the most famous for a number of reasons. First of all, Philip Zimbardo, who was the person that was behind this study. Dr. Zimbardo is one of the most outspoken members in the social psychology field. He's one of the most famous members, and he's also perhaps, out of all social psychologists of all time, if not the most, perhaps one of the top 5 or top 3 in terms of how much academic success as a professional this person had. There's a lot of research that have been established by Dr. Zimbardo that extends to a lot of different areas, but not is as popular or as famous as the Stanford prison experiment. So, in the 70s, Dr. Zimbardo was a young scholar trying to establish his mark on the field, and he had been inspired by the study of a fellow high school classmate, like back in the day, who was called Stanley Milgram. And most likely you'll learn about Stanley Milgram at a different point in this study, in this course, I'm sorry. They didn't have the limitations that we have now as far as how we can treat participants and what we can do in a research study. So he wanted to see how conformity was affected. Specifically though, he wanted to see conformity, and he wanted to see group relations, he wanted to see conflict, he wanted to see then attitudes, how it all related in a prison. So this was a mock prison that he created in Stanford University. They borrowed him sort of like a small underground part of a building, and he created a mock prison here. He wanted to make sure that all the participants were sort of similar, so he recruited participants, and they were all around the same age, they were all from the same ethnicity, and they were all paid, so they were all college students, and with the flip of a coin, before that, he gave them all psychological tests, and he gave them all psychological tests because he wanted to make sure that he took the most normal ones. With the flip of a coin, then he split them up. Half are going to be participants, half are going to be prisoners, and it was just like, go. The study was meant to last for 2 weeks and ended up lasting only 6 days because of how rough things got. The prisoners at one point were influenced by one who decided to take on the role of leadership, even though it wasn't granted to this person. And then after that person began to be extreme, the rest of the prison girls began to be extreme. One of the prisoners broke down emotionally, and when this person broke down, little by little, the next day, the next prisoner broke down, the next prisoner broke down. It's so well documented that you can see it. I'm just summarizing briefly. So after 6 days, Zimbardo had to cancel it because it was getting too rough. The study had been raising a lot of questions over the years. One, because there were no establishment of variables, it was just like a situation of observation and just go. 2, because apparently Zimbardo had not been as neutral as he said he was. Apparently he had been also participating by giving orders or hinting at things that they could do and so on. And most than anything, ethical standards, because of the way that the prisoners were treated. It was a very harsh environment. However, still, this is one of the most famous studies, perhaps the most famous studies, and I strongly believe that we can still learn from it. In a position that you're placed can have a strong effect on how you act. And this has been supported by multiple other studies that have moved forward. If, for example, you are, right now there was a lot of talk, a lot of movements because of the racial insensitivity that were going on through the Black Lives Matter movement and police discrimination and police brutality. So a lot of people were talking about the George Floyd case. A man was killed, and the police officers, the police department, were saying it was one bad apple. But then people were making a lot of comments and a lot of noise for what was happening to the other 3 officers that were there and were watching. Social psychology can help explain a lot, but we can just say one thing for now. We look at this video on the screen, and if we were to think that had we been one of the officers, we would have acted differently, we would have taken this officer off, and the man's, George Floyd's life would have been saved. We think that. The reality is that we don't know. We don't know how would we act unless we were placed in that position. We can role play a lot in our minds and think how we would have acted differently, but the reality is that we don't know unless we are placed in that act. Quick story. One time I had a conversation with a former student in one of my classes on human sexuality, where he was just talking about strongly advocating against the rights, the civil rights movement from transgender folks. And this student of mine was saying, well, you know, I was raised in a poor environment and I was just told that I had to deal with it. So I'm telling to all these transgender folks, just deal with it. And I told them, well, you're a male. Living in a world where nobody has ever, perhaps not even yourself, questioned your masculinity, questioned your role as a male. You were raised in an environment that was, giving you all this information about how you're supposed to act as a male, and you never questioned that because you never felt the need for it. Good for you. How would you know if you would have had thought the same had the environment been pushing ideas of roles that you're supposed to be acting according to a sex that you don't belong to? It's easy for me, who have never had any issue with gender identity, to tell someone that has struggled with identity, deal with it. How would I know that I would still have the same attitude would I be in that place? We don't know. And I think that's a key in the Stanford prison experiment. Roles can play a big, pardon the redundancy, but the roles that you're placed in can play a big role in how you think, how you evaluate what is your attitude towards it. Something that we can all consider. Next time that you feel that somebody has been acting unfair to you, next time that you think that somebody's just being a crybaby, next time that you think that something perceived for someone else unfair for you is fair, how would you have felt if you would be in that place? We don't know. All these folks that participated in the Stanford prison experiment were not really out of the norm. They were normal guys. But when they were placed in the position of prisoner and prison guard, they worked mentally their way into the role so much that it shifted their attitude dramatically. And that, my dear beloved students, is one of the main lessons that we have in the Stanford prison experiment. Good work.